Hey guys, Peter here to do an album review. Today I'm here to tell you about the latest from Hood and Menace, the Tritonus Bell, out August 27th on Season of Mist. This album has 7 tracks, 44 minutes in length, and this is the band's 6th full-length studio album. They are a Finnish death doom metal band. Now, the first thing that I want to touch on is how they put this record together. The overall structure of the album is really interesting because this is a record that feels overall very balanced, very cohesive, but at the same time very linear. Not super dynamic, not creating incredible ebbs and flows, which is something that goes with the style, with the genre, with the soundscape that they create. But by adding an intro and adding an outro, you're creating 2 bookends that really packs the record tight. It just brings everything together, and at the same time it gives a sense of continuity, a sense of coming full circle. Because when you look at the intro, it really allows you to understand a lot of the sonic drive that this album is going to have is present in that intro, and then a lot of that sonic drive kind of becomes part of the overall atmosphere, maybe a little bit harder to define throughout the 5 middle tracks. But coming out on the outro, you start to see it perhaps exiting the shadows. So it's a nice way of balancing out the record. It's a nice way to make an album feel compact, but at the same time giving it a sense of continuity. Like I said, giving it a sense of going full circle with the overall structure that they created for this record. Once you get into the soundscape, I think this is the selling point on this record, is their ability to have this death doom spinal chord that really defines the overall substance of the album, but also including a lot of 80s classic heavy metal sounds that makes the record at times feel a little bit more up-tempo, without losing its darkness, without losing its despair, without losing that gloomy feel that you're really gonna get track in and track out. So it's a very hard soundscape to describe to the listener because it feels big, it feels chunky, it feels powerful, it carries you out, it mushes you through, it has that drag out process that you would expect from a death doom record, but at the same time, the elements within the album are not muddied. They're really well defined, and you see some of them coming into the forefront, driving the experience, pushing the songs a little bit more, creating that up-tempo feel in the tracks, not brightening the mood, but definitely increasing the sense of movement that the songs have within themselves. This is not true on every single track, but when you look back and you look a little bit deeper within the record itself, it becomes a little bit of the common denominator, if you will, across all 7 songs. And one of the reasons for that drive, one of the reasons for that up-tempo, it's definitely the guitar sound. Perhaps the most driven, the most dynamic, the most diverse element within this record. Some songs, they stayed very close to home. They kept that death metal sound, they kept that doom drive, that grittiness of sound, that grittiness of approach, and in some tracks they infused that classic 80s heavy metal approach that really brings the tempo into the forefront, that brightens up the mood ever so slightly, but perhaps more important, increases the speed, increases the momentum, increases the force in which you transport yourself within the tracks. I really love this blend, and this is the winning formula for this kind of record, for this kind of sound. You want something that ignites, you want something that has a little bit of life in it, but at the same time you don't want to strip away the DNA of the band, and you don't want to strip away the DNA of their sound and keep the record as gloomy as possible with still some bright spots that really push the momentum forward. The guitars are definitely the driver of this experience on this record. The drums have more of a traditional approach. They create a little bit of the backbone, they create a little bit of the foundation of the record. They stay very subdued, never really jumping into the forefront, never really jumping into the spotlight, just rather having a more secondary role, but a role that's very important in order to balance out the approach, in order to balance out the overall soundscape and give a sense of continuity from track to track, and allowing the guitars to be as diverse as they are and really pushing the momentums of the songs. I don't think you can do that and still allow the record to be centered, to be balanced, without the drums doing exactly what they are doing on this record. Then on top of this, you have the vocals, another element that stays very balanced while still bringing in a few left hooks, if you will. I love the harsh vocals because they really give a sense of darkness to this record. Even when the songs feel a little bit brighter or feel like they have more of an up-tempo to it, the album never really lets these songs get out of hand or completely run away from the listener, because the vocals are grounding the album. They have that sense of darkness, they have that sense of heaviness to them, and that stays pretty much a staple across the entire experience of this record. Now, adding some clean vocals, adding some female vocals really changes a little bit of the nuances, but enhances the overall experience. It gives the necessary ebbs and flows within the songs and allows the record to not feel as repetitive as it would have been otherwise, because there's just not a lot of movement on this album. You're moving forward, but there's no movement up or down. So changing the vocals, adding a few cleans, adding a few female vocals here and there, changes the atmosphere without really changing the momentum, without really changing the direction of the record itself, but it does give enough of a speed bump here and there, a little bit of a pushing up and bringing it down, in order for the record to come alive, in order for the listener to kind of perk up his ears and start to paying a little bit more attention to the track, because suddenly it's taken a little bit of a left turn, and that was perhaps unexpected up until that point with everything that the album was offering. Overall, I really enjoy this record. I think the soundscape that this record has, it's really the calling card of the album. Everything else kind of falls in line with it. I love this infusion of 80s classic heavy metal sound into a more death doom driven approach. It just makes it more eclectic. It makes it a little bit more diverse. It expands the palette, and it makes the songs feel like they have a little bit more energy. And for an album that has 44 minutes, 7 songs, it's just at the right spot, with the right duration, with the right length. You don't want anything more than that, because it would become a little bit overdone. So I feel like the overall elements that they took in constructing this album really makes this an interesting experience for the listener. And like I said, the soundscape is really the winning formula. That 80s style heavy metal really takes this record and pushes it to a different arena. It gives it a little bit more life. It gives it a little bit more energy. Now, as far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Corpus Asunder. Chunky opening for this track with great guitar sound all around. The clean vocals bring a little bit of a somber mood, a somber atmosphere to how this song progresses, to how this song feels. And then the harsh vocals bring the darkness into the picture and really ground the track, bring the mood down. There's some peaks and valleys throughout this song, mostly created by the dynamic nuances of the vocal approach. Musically, I felt that the song was perhaps a little bit more linear. There are some changes here and there, but they're not really drastic changes. So overall, the vocals is really what's pulling the strings as far as this track is concerned. Next, we have Scattered into the Dark. I love the intro into this track. It feels like a more methodic song, perhaps the more doomish song of them all, because it has all the doom elements coming into the forefront and becoming the driver of the experience. It's not an up-tempo song. It doesn't really push itself forward. It still has some death elements mixed into it as well, but it doesn't have as much of that guitar drive. That 80s heavy metal influence is not as predominant on this song as it is on other tracks. So when you get to this track, you really feel like you're just spinning the tires and you're not going anywhere. It has that doom, mushy vibe to it. It has that atmosphere. It has that sense of slow progression from the beginning into the end. And I really like this track because it felt very different from everything that you were getting up until this point. So it kind of broke a little bit of the mold, and it gave you a little bit more of a traditional style doom track all around. Then last but not least, Instruments of Somber, Finality. This is the instrumental outro. Coming out into this song, I felt like this was a track that makes you realize how dynamic the guitars were up until this point, but perhaps with every other element that was coming at you and the atmosphere that the album creates, you start to kind of forget about that aspect of this record. Once you get into this outro, it becomes apparent because they allow the guitars to be in the forefront, to be the driver of the experience, to be very dynamic. And therefore, you start to realize that, hey, there's a lot of this up until this point. Maybe I need to go back, listen to it again, pay a little bit more attention to what the guitars are doing, and see where I can discover new about this record second time around. So I feel like this song has a very interesting approach. It binds the record together. It gives you a sense of coming full circle when you look at the intro, when you look at the outro. And at the same time, it really ignites your interest back into the record again, forcing you to go back to that beginning and listen to the record with a different lens, with a different perspective. This is it. Hooded Menace, the Tritonus Bell, out August 27th on Season of Mist. Let me know your thoughts on this band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.